Okay, well, let's return to our topic for this evening. We've been having so many great calls. I did want to take a couple of email questions, and Brandon had emailed us. He's emailing from North Carolina, said if Japan increases from 20 to 30 months, will age and source cattle still bring a premium? Similar to the question we had earlier in the show. Dan, why don't you take a crack at that?
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I think the situation internationally, and I'm going to look at it globally first, is that if we look at the export side of things in this past year, over 15% of our beef production is being exported, and we're seeing a total value per head of over $200 a head attributable to exports. And one of the misnomers is that when you say 15% of the product is exported, it's not across the board. There's certain products, short ribs, short plates, beef livers, 75–80% of the products being exported that's attributable to that $200 a head. So it's all about value, as I mentioned earlier, and maximizing the value. So if you look at the traceability issue at hand here, especially in phase 2 of the proposed rule, it has a definite impact globally, and that's where Japan comes in with a 20-month and down program that's currently on the books, the NHTC program for Europe, non-hormone treated cattle. These are programs that work today in adding value. They're a mini form of traceability, so to speak. And as far as going from 20 months to 30 months, we do believe that there's impact there for a premium, where we will still add value. If you look at this whole traceability issue globally, we recently completed a study MEF did with Kansas State, Colorado State, and Montana State that determined that we are a little bit behind as it relates to traceability vis-a-vis our international competitors. And one that stands out is Australia has done a wonderful job of marketing the fact that they do have traceability in Australia. So these are the sorts of things we're up against. Yeah. But to answer the caller's questions, we definitely see value in even at 20 to 30 months.
That's great. Carrie's calling us from Ohio. Let me go straight to Carrie. Go ahead.
Hi. I have a question as far as I know the Cattle Association has been very verbal in the slaughter of America's horses, and there was just recently some funds put back in for meat inspection. And I'm wondering how would your organization, how would they do a trace back for the slaughter horses? Do you have any idea on that, or like a premise ID for that? Or
Colin, do you have any thoughts around that?
I have to be honest with you, I have not looked at the horse side of it. Really have been focused on what it does with cattle. But her point about getting the funding restored for horse processing inspection in this country was a huge victory for our industry and our association. I think will go a long way in helping alleviate a lot of the pain and suffering that we're seeing from horses that are being abandoned right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's go to the Northwest. We have an Idaho caller. Pat, go ahead with your call.
Yes, my question is, when that animal's harvested, what happens to that ID tag, and what's preventing the harvester from, if that animal was a low quality, taking that tag and putting it on a higher quality animal?
Okay, so let me clarify. So goes to the packing house, and your question is, what prevents that packer from taking a tag from a higher quality animal and putting it on a lower, attributing it to vice versa.
Vice versa.
What
happens to that tag when that animal's harvested?
Okay. Mark, what happens to that tag?
What happens when that tag comes in, we are mandated to read it. And we have to read it if it's a dangle tag, if it's an RFID tag, whatever tag comes in from that producer, we would read that tag and we would transfer that information directly to the carcass. And then we would keep those tags in a sequential number so that we could actually trace that tag back to that individual carcass. So, we're mandated to take that information, and again, depending on if the cattle are in a program, if they're natural cattle, if they're NHTC cattle, if they're agent source verified cattle, we'll transfer that tag and that information and then store that tag, and we would transfer that directly to the carcass tag.
Okay. Very good. Melvin is calling from Arizona. Melvin, what's your question? Melvin, you're there? Maybe not. Well, let's go to another one of our email questions. Ellen, I guess, from Wisconsin, asked the question about what does traceability do broadly for the export market. Mark, I'd turn that back to you.
Well, traceability is probably been in the export market the longest. That's probably where it really started. And every country has some type of a traceability program. Korea's got a traceability program. Japan's got a traceability program. Japan's program is very important now with all of the catastrophe and the nuclear issues and things like that. So consumers in these countries have an ear for the traceability program. They may not be able to fully define it, but they know that traceability means something to them as far as their animal health and as far as the food that they eat. Plus, we see more people in international markets that want to know where their food's produced and where it comes from. And really, we have to have some kind of traceability program to do that.
Very good. Josh is calling us from Kansas. Josh, what's your question tonight?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. My
Absolutely.
question is, what, without making it mandatory, how are you going to implement this? ADT is a animal disease. It's not to sell meat. I mean, I own a livestock market, and I mean, I can't get these people to cut their bulls. How am I going to get them to put an ear tag in their ear?
It's a great question. You know, Bill, we have an industry with, 700 and some thousand producers, an average cow herd size of 30 and 40. How do you make people do this without it being mandatory?
Well, it all goes down to each local state, and I think that's one of the components of this. It's extremely important. It isn't a top-down system from the government going down to everybody. It's worked within each state, and that's really the key component, is involving the state veterinarian and making sure that they have a program in place that is going to be workable.
And Colin, it begin. If I understand correctly, this is a phased-in program. This is step one, and so
Right.
they're starting with over 18-month-old cattle, only cattle that are traveling interstate. Give us some perspective. It's not a snap your fingers and we're done sort of deal, right?
Exactly, because the concern was if this was a snap your fingers and have the entire program in place, that we would have a lot of pushback. There's still a lot of producers in this country that don't want to have anything to do with this system. And when they see the government attached to it, that makes them even more leery. So this phase-in approach we think is really good. What we learn in this first phase, with everything over 18 months of age, it's crossing state lines, will help us make phase two even more successful. And once we can show the benefit of that, I think we'll see the market really start to drive this. And that's really the best case scenario, and is where NCBA has been. Let's let the market drive this adoption and acceptance across the board.
Well, we're in Denver tonight, and we have a call from Denver who lives in Oklahoma. Denver, you're confusing us. Go ahead.
Hello, Kevin. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you.
Good. I appreciate all that you guys are doing there. I have a question for anyone on the panel there. My question is, if I'm marketing a healthy herd to the markets and they leave my place healthy, and then they mix with other cattle throughout the market and into the feed yards, on the traceability, where does it stop coming back? How do we trace that back to my ranch, or does it stop in the feed yard or where we found this?
So they were healthy when they left my ranch. They got commingled at a livestock market, commingled at a stocker or feed yard, and now all of a sudden they're tracing it back to me. Where does it begin and end, Bill?
Well, it starts where the disease is found, and it goes as far back as necessary. So, hopefully, if the system's functioning properly, it would had note that animal went through that feedlot and went through that sale barn and came from that ranch. And at that point, you can see that footprint of where that animal got sick. Could it possibly have got that disease? And that's one of the values of this, I think, is to make sure that the innocent are innocent and make sure that the point of disease pickup is identified.
I think that's a great point. We're not going to allow USDA to make this a gotcha system. And if they do, then NCBA is going to be the first group out there making sure we shut this down. But we don't get the impression that's going to be the case. I think Bill's exactly right. I think we're going to have professional investigation of what goes on, and once we find where the source is, that's where it'll stop.
Yeah. Bill is calling us from Virginia. Bill, what's your question tonight?
Yeah, my question is reciprocity. The import of beef. Are there similar programs being instituted in Europe and everything to make this program universal?
Mark, your company deals with the beef industry, the poultry industry around the globe. What about this reciprocity? I got a tongue transplant. Reciprocity issue.
Well, as Dan mentioned, I would say we're somewhat behind in food and animal traceability. The Australians probably have the most robust system of traceability. Their system, of course, is mandatory, and it has been for quite some time. The Canadians were working on a program. Anybody that would be exporting meat to a country that requires traceability, they will have a program, and they will have to meet that program, and that is their requirement. So every country, regardless, is working on traceability. It just depends on what stage of traceability they're in.
What a great set of thoughtful questions. I wish we had a 2-hour show. We thank you panelist members for a great discussion tonight. And remember, our staff is continuing to take your membership calls. Join NCBA today. Give us a call at 1-866-USA-BEEF. It's a great time to be part of the country's leading cattle industry organization.